How's it going, guys? It's Kass. As always, if you've been enjoying my content, then hit that subscribe button. In today's video, we're going to be continuing talking about the changes coming in patch 9.0.5, and at this time it has already came out, given that this video is filmed Monday and it should be coming out tomorrow. So the main thing that we're going to talk about in today's video is Fel Bombardment and the change that it received. The buff that it received was a 10-second increase to the time that the buff is actually up for, and also a 5% increase in the chance that it's to trigger. And while a 5% increase doesn't seem like that much, with this legendary, the proc rates at the beginning didn't really seem that great to begin with. So a 5% buff is actually kind of hard to really know if it's good or not. So I think the best way to actually show the main difference and what this means is to really just compare the two. And so that's what we're going to do here. I have a video of my character on live and my character on PTR, and we're just going to watch the main difference here. So the top character is the live character and the bottom character is the PTR character. And as you can see right at the beginning, I'm already getting a significant amount more stacks. I already got a full 5 stack and used it there, while the top one is still only on 3 stacks. And then I got another stack at the very end, bringing my stacks to 4. So in that time frame, I got 9 stacks on PTR with the current change, and I only got 3 on live. Now we're going to see here, we get another immolation aura. We use the Fel Bombardment there at a 5 stack, and we got a second 5 stack on the bottom. We got an additional 5 stack on the bottom, and just like that, we have a 4 stack back on the top, and we got 1 more stack on the bottom. So in that situation, you can really see that the amount of triggers that we're getting is significantly more, but it is also important to point out that with the randomness of these triggers, sometimes you're going to still get bad pulls with the new one. The main thing is that this change made it so the amount of situations that you get bad outcomes from is significantly less. And when you're working with anything that it has inherent randomness to it, lowering the amount of randomness is always a very good change. So obviously the next question is what does this really mean? And this is going to be where I'm going to be looking at some sims, and this is going to be a disclaimer for these sims. These sims are done prior to the patch coming out, so it's not necessarily going to completely reflect the actual state of the game. However, this is probably going to be the closest that I'm going to get at this time. Also, it's important to point out that whenever we're talking about one specific item changing in Sims, the amount of impact it can really have is not that crazy. A legendary in these situations is probably going to account for like plus or minus 2% of overall damage. And realistically, as long as you're choosing like one of the top 4 legendaries for Demon Hunter, you're probably going to be perfectly fine. I think a lot of the choices that the legendaries have for Demon Hunter are more based off of current playstyles and what you enjoy playing than really one being better than the other. In a lot of these situations, player skill is going to be dictating the difference in damage a lot more than the actual legendary choices. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and start and look at some specific situations for some specific legendaries. So this is the single target situation for Fel Bombardment. And single target is going to be the worst situation to play this legendary in. In a lot of these situations, it accounts for like 2 or 3% of total damage. And realistically, it's not that great in single target. This is going to be Everburn, which is the Burning Wound legendary. And we can see the main difference here in single target. It's a pretty drastic jump between the two. And then we have Collective Anguish here. Pretty similar between these two, some slight variance. But realistically, when they're within about 100 to 150, I wouldn't necessarily say one is definitely better than the other. And then finally, we have Collective Anguish, Chaos Theory. I thought I'd put this in there just to show some of the relative difference. It's also important to point out that this is one character using specific talents and with specific gear. This character that I pulled is the top parsing Demon Hunter consistently on Warcraft logs, so I figured I would use him just as an example because this is probably going to be one of the better options to use. Next, we're going to look at 3 target situations. This is going back to Fel Bombardment, and we can start to see where Fel Bombardment starts to kind of take over here. It's slightly better than Burning Wound in 3 targets, and it's significantly better than Collective Anguish in 3 targets. Now, this is where it starts to get pretty crazy, and that's when we go to 5 targets. And Fel Bombardment is now in first place by a pretty large margin, being nearly 500 more than Burning Wound, and in that 700 more than Collective Anguish. Then when we compare it to something like Dark Glare Medallion, we really start to see the difference. Nearly or almost 1200 more damage in just one legendary here. And then obviously I put Chaos Theory in there just to really show the differences. So what does this tell us? This tells us that as long as these sims are calculating the effectiveness of Fel Bombardment correctly, that Fel Bombardment in AoE situations is actually probably just one of the best options to take. It's pretty easy to play. It's not really anything that's too tedious to play, like something like Burning Wound feels kind of tedious to have to tab target auto attack, tab target auto attack, tab target auto attack just to get the buff up on everything. Whereas with this is just pressing 2 buttons. I honestly think that this could be a pretty good option for big AoE situations like Mythic Plus or like Sun King. This legendary could see a lot of playability, which is very nice and honestly very interesting because this is the legendary that I expected the least out of. The main thing that I do want to point out is the effectiveness in single target with this legendary is not great. So there could be some situations where the lack of DPS that you get in the single target situations on like tyrannical weeks, this might not be the best option for you. You might take Collective Anguish or Burning Wound instead. But realistically, this legendary is in a pretty good spot just based on the overall sims. And it's honestly pretty fun to play. So I think there's going to be a lot of playability with this legendary. And I'm surprised with how good the testing went. As always, if you liked the video, leave a like. If you didn't like the video, F5 refresh, try it again, maybe like the second time. Have a good one.